Good afternoon, my name is Rozenta. I come from Microsoft, and I find myself in quite the interesting position speaking to audiences during this Cybersecurity Month because I've very recently joined Microsoft, and before that I was in the Council of the EU representing Latvia. So my perspective on the issues from an industry perspective right now consists of using the information that I've acquired as a civil servant for 15 years and trying to figure out what I can do from an industry perspective to activate the future of cybersecurity and the plans that for Europe, and to address the question, are we headed in the right direction? So I have a massive pile of notes that I was looking through while the speakers were making their comments and points, and what I found interesting, well, first of all, I'm going to throw most of this aside and try to refer to it when necessary. But looking at all the speakers before me, I realized that what I wanted to say is that the future of cybersecurity, the most important element from my perspective as an industry representative, is to continually build trust in cybersecurity products and services and cooperate very closely with governments, industry, and civil society to do so. So looking down the line, I was thinking about what does Microsoft do with the European Parliament. So one thing that we do is we're concentrating on election security. There's lots of elections coming up, and so Microsoft has thought, how can we make elections more secure and how can we work on defending democracy? We've worked with the Parliament and other governments around the world to try to think of how we can make election campaigns more secure. How can we make email more secure around those election campaigns? How we can work with campaigns coming up that to make them more secure, to not make them vulnerable to disinformation or hacking and so forth. So this is one element where I think that will be quite important in this coming year of election an election cycle. So hopefully we can get strong foundations and build forward and not concentrating on the process of getting people into elected positions. One thing, so Aris is next, the Commission. So how do we work with the Commission, and how will that strengthen the way ahead in Europe? Well, one simple thing is that Microsoft is holding a series of training workshops. What can we offer to civil servants that will help them increase their cyber hygiene? In my former position, I was involved in the Latvian presidency, and one project was that we created the Cyber Hygiene Initiative and pledge across countries that was signed by several member states and also the EAS. One of the difficulties of that project was finding a company and developing an expensive program to implement in all the governments that have signed up to this initiative with very good intentions, but then to spread it across all these governments and deal with licensing requirements and so forth. And now that I'm sitting in Microsoft, I realize that we have the resources to simply invite all of those people to Microsoft, and we could provide that training with what we have on hand and the specializations and expertise that we have had. So we're trying to also work on that and see how we can raise the basic cyber hygiene of European civil servants here in Brussels, and then if necessary across the world. Of course, we look at legislation that the Commission works on, and of course we have been very involved in the past NIS directive and how that's being implemented and how that applies to companies such as Microsoft. But we're looking at cybersecurity, the cybersecurity certification framework. And while I can go into the details of exactly what our position is and what the industry is that it just mostly our message is keep industry involved. We're the ones developing the products that get certified. We have the experience in seeing where the problems could be and so forth. And I think this is an issue that both the Parliament and the Council and the Commission with its initial proposal has recognized. So we actively look on how stakeholders will be involved in the drafts that continue. One thing I also realize is that looking at digital single market and the next 5-year cycle in the EU, it's also very relevant to consider how Europe develops its cybersecurity industrial future. How products and services are developed within Europe and how small medium enterprises are energized and activated, especially in the context of the European Cybersecurity Competence Center and the network of coordination centers. So where does a large company such as Microsoft, that is often seen as not a European company, how do we fit into that? So we've reflected on that, and of course there's lots of things that we can do and we cannot do, but we want to be seen as a facilitator of European industry, of European cybersecurity industry and the future, and not to be seen as a competitor from the outside. So that's one thing that we want to look at and coordinate in the future. Okay, next, Europol. So looking at Europol, I'm thinking about how Microsoft cooperates with law enforcement. We have a digital crimes unit that very actively cooperates with with Europol and other law enforcement around the world. It's an international team of attorneys, investigators, data scientists, engineers, analysts, business professionals, etc. Here I am looking at my notes just to make sure that I don't say anything wrong. We have a formal partnership with Europol, and that has led to successful disruption of various cyber attacks and investigations spanning across Europe have been aided by Microsoft input, so we hope that that's a benefit and that we could be a valuable partner to law enforcement, offering the expertise that we have and the access to information, of course, within all privacy regulation norms and so forth, so that we can be a trusted partner also for law enforcement. Okay, I'm sure there was something else on that. I'm very glad that we have there's also a panelist from industry who can give the more in-depth knowledge of industry and his experience. And I'm also happy that you brought up the Charter of Trust, which is an excellent example of how industry can work together to cooperate on establishing norms for responsible behavior of industry and the private sector within cybersecurity. Microsoft has a similar initiative of the Tech Accord that we've worked on, so we think that they're a good complement to each other to have all full industry involvement. Also, and then I'm thinking of who is missing on this panel. I think that civil society perhaps, and also governments. So I also wanted to make one last point on what we think is important for the future of cyberspace, not only in Europe but globally, that involves governments and civil society. We have been Microsoft is also actively involved in looking at the cyber norms and responsible behavior in cyberspace and developing trust and security and stability in cyberspace. And we are currently very closely working with the French government, who will in November have a Paris Peace Forum. At the Paris Peace Forum, there will be a Paris call on trust and stability in cyberspace, and Microsoft has been partnering with the French government to involve governments, industry, and civil society in this initiative to sign on to a list of cyber norms. These are norms that have already been established in other places like the UN, but we find that for all areas or all members of the multi-stakeholder model, it's quite important to get them more involved in also establishing responsible behavior in cyberspace. So we have very high involvement of government, industry, and civil society around the world, and we look forward to having this call announced in Paris in mid-November. Also associated to that, one last thing that I wanted to mention, I have a very tiny pin and it's very obscure, but we have a digital peace campaign that Microsoft has started to lead, which is trying to get more involvement of global citizens around the world to recognize the need for responsible behavior in cyberspace. So I encourage all of you to look at Digital Peace now and perhaps sign the petition if you find that of help.